Hi, I'm Rebecca Nicholson from Northumbria University in the UK, and I'm presenting our paper Emergency Remote Education in Nigeria, Challenges and Design Opportunities. This work was carried out together with Rebecca Strachan at Northumbria University, Opeyemi Dele-Ajayi from Meta, and Kemi Fasae from STEMRes Learning Initiative, based in Lagos in Nigeria. The work in this paper was carried out during a period of emergency remote education in Nigeria, while teachers were teaching remotely thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns that ensued. While the data in this paper was collected during COVID lockdowns, the implications are much wider reaching, as Nigeria has a huge challenge with delivering emergency remote education. Nigeria has the third highest rate of out-of-school children, and they currently have approximately 20 million children out of education, primarily in northern states of Nigeria, where there are still ongoing conflicts. To put the work in this paper into context, it is worth noting some things about Nigeria and their digital infrastructure. So Nigeria relies on mobile phones as a primary route to accessing the internet, with mobile phone use rapidly growing. Teledensity, which is the number of mobile phone connections per 100 inhabitants, is 115%, with 60% of them still using 2G connections, while 10% are using 3G and 28% using 4G. Internet and electricity connections, though, are not always reliable, with approximately 60% of the population having access to electricity. And most rely on data that's bought as top-ups rather than monthly subscription plans that you or I might be more used to. Emergency remote education specifically differs from traditional forms of online education, as it's implemented rapidly and in response to crisis. This leaves little time to plan and design such responses, and as such requires specific and tailored educational technologies. Emergency remote education has been explored in the context of COVID, but this was primarily in the USA, and notably African countries such as Nigeria were underexplored as a context. The work done in the USA and other European countries is difficult to apply to Nigeria, as they have very specific constraints, including poor internet connectivity, prohibitively high technology costs, and a lack of infrastructure. Given the constraints regarding infrastructure and device availability, the most common device in Nigeria are mobile phones. Mobile learning specifically is known to have many benefits, including facilitating personalised learning, the flexibility to allow learning anywhere and any time, as well as supporting authentic learning environments. In Africa, and more specifically Nigeria, many of the studies carried out that explore mobile learning have been carried out with a focus on students rather than teachers. This has left a gap in our understanding of teachers' experiences of enacting mobile learning. Mobile learning is suggested as a way of offering educational experiences in low-resource settings, where mobile phones are becoming increasingly ubiquitous. Although there is research on the use of M-learning in low-resource settings, this is not focused on how to design M-learning experiences for emergency remote education, particularly within K-12 education. There have been a variety of frameworks developed for M-learning. The majority of these focus on the pedagogical design or adoption of M-learning, primarily in Western or high-resource settings. One well-regarded framework that examines M-learning from a more socio-technical aspect is Kuhl's FRAME model. This framework outlines three aspects of M-learning: device, learner and social, and also explores the intersections between them: device usability, social technology and interaction learning. The device aspect is concerned with the physical, technical and functional characteristics of a mobile device. The learner aspect takes into account an individual's cognitive abilities, memory, prior knowledge, emotions and possible motivations, while the social aspect takes into account the processes of social interaction and cooperation. Device usability and social technology draw on Norman's discussions of design affordances. Device usability concerns the characteristics of a mobile device that support cognitive tasks. Social technology considers the relationship between multiple users in a system, as opposed to the device aspect, which considers the relationship between one individual and the device. Interaction learning concerns learning theories, although the authors are clear that this should heavily rely on explicitly constructivist learning theories. So within this context, our work sought to answer the following research questions. Firstly, how are teachers in Nigeria currently using educational technology to enact emergency remote education? Secondly, what are Nigerian teachers' experiences of using educational technology to enact emergency remote education? And what are the socio-technical design opportunities to support the delivery of emergency remote education in low-resource settings such as Nigeria? A mixed methods approach was used. Firstly, we carried out a questionnaire with 374 teachers in Nigeria. This was exploratory, aiming to understand how emergency remote education was being carried out, as prior to the questionnaire we had no idea how they were teaching. We then carried out in-depth semi-structured interviews with 20 teachers. We asked those teachers to keep a diary prior to the interviews, and the interview schedules were personalised based on their diary responses in order to understand in more detail how they were enacting emergency remote education. The data from the questionnaires was analysed using descriptive statistics to understand the most commonly used methods of enacting emergency remote education. The data from the interviews was thematically analysed using reflective inductive thematic analysis. In terms of demographics of the respondents, it should be mentioned that while we aimed to recruit teachers from a variety of educational levels and states, this was not entirely successful. The majority of respondents, 96%, taught secondary age pupils, while only 4% taught primary level. And of the respondents, the majority taught in Lagos, 85%, 3% were for Ekiti, 11% from Ogun, 0.5% from Ondo, and 0.2% from Osun. The findings from the questionnaire demonstrated that the majority of teachers were using WhatsApp to enact emergency remote education. 70% of the teachers who completed the questionnaire were only using WhatsApp, while 86% were using it in conjunction with other methods. Many of these findings are broken down further in the paper to consider the differences in stages of education between primary and secondary schools, and we'd urge you to have a look at the paper for more details. In the open text box in the questionnaire, we asked teachers to give us further detail about how they were teaching at the time. The majority of teachers were sending messages, voice notes and snaps, which is pictures, and this was done via WhatsApp. Most were directed by their school principals to do this and to use WhatsApp. And the majority had large WhatsApp groups that both students and teachers were a part of, with teachers and students attending at the timetable time for lessons to happen. This meant that students might have maths at 10 a.m. and then English at 1 p.m, but would both be using the same WhatsApp message group. The thematic analysis of the interview findings resulted in 4 themes. WhatsApp was the only viable emergency remote education technology. Teachers adopted a similar pedagogical approach to their face-to-face classroom. ERE lacked embodied interaction, and teachers found ERE was more onerous than their traditional teaching practice. Teachers were clear that they had significant infrastructure challenges, a lack of data, electricity and devices, and this was to be expected given the context, and included both students' infrastructure challenges as well as teachers' own resources, or lack of. We found that teachers were adopting a similar pedagogical approach online to the ones that they adopted in the classroom. As such, WhatsApp was configured to resemble school routines and structures, and teachers were mainly following existing lesson plans, with many students completing work on paper and then snapping or photographing the page to send back to the teacher for corrections. Teachers found challenges online, though, when enacting these existing pedagogies. We saw that emergency remote education via WhatsApp lacked embodied interaction. Teachers really struggled with the lack of physical presence, struggling to understand how engaged and motivated their students were. This was particularly an issue for behaviour management, where teachers were really not used to enacting this remotely. Teachers overall found that enacting emergency remote education was definitely more onerous than their traditional teaching practices. Some teachers acknowledged benefits, such as enjoying the lack of commute and being able to be more flexible, but the majority spoke of a job that had become increasingly challenging, with them struggling to separate their work and home life. Many saw it as their duty to make some sacrifices, including sacrificing both their money and their time. In the paper, we highlight 3 areas of interest in the discussion, and for each we suggest a design consideration based upon our work, as well as an ongoing design opportunity that future work might seek to explore. I will cover these briefly here in this video, but we would urge you to read the paper for a more detailed consideration of these. So the first consideration is that WhatsApp was used as a tool of practical necessity, and this links very much into questions around device usability. So we saw that WhatsApp, rather than considerations of device usability, in an emergency remote education context, it appears to be much more about device availability. And we suggest that we should use existing applications and devices to design emergency remote education in low resource settings. And those designing M-learning for emergency remote education scenarios should consider using existing applications and devices that students are already familiar with. plus those that they have access to, such as mobile phones and WhatsApp or other similar applications, for example, other mobile instant messaging platforms. An ongoing design opportunity is understanding the pedagogical affordances of mobile instant messaging for emergency remote education in low-resource settings. So future work might consider the development of a framework highlighting the pedagogical affordances of mobile instant messaging for emergency remote education in low-resource settings. So we also saw that WhatsApp was configured to create a continued sense of place, and this very much links back to social technology considerations. We saw that WhatsApp was configured to create a continued sense of place in the absence of a physical classroom through the use of familiar pedagogies together with routines and structures that were similar to traditional schooling. We suggest that when designing for emergency remote education settings, we should create clear structures and routines. So when configuring applications such as WhatsApp, we should create these clear structures and routines through restricting the ability to post at non-lesson times or setting clear behavioural guidelines, such as a pre-agreed set of appropriate behaviours. An ongoing design opportunity is to consider the role of students as digitally connected actors, and future work might explore the role of students as social actors that are connected digitally, for example through peer collaboration and peer support. And this may go some way in reducing the burden on teachers to be constantly available. And finally, we saw that pedagogy remained traditional, and this is very much linked to interaction learning. So throughout, we saw that pedagogy remained traditional in almost all settings. And M-learning is often promoted for establishing collaborative or creative pedagogies, but during this context in emergency remote education, it was used to support existing pedagogies. So we suggest that digital technologies used for emergency remote education should initially be configured to support pedagogies that teachers are familiar with. And an ongoing design opportunity is exploring co-design in emergency remote education settings. So future work might seek to explore co-design or co-teaching practices, allowing teachers to understand the potential affordances of WhatsApp as a pedagogical tool, and for designers to understand teachers' existing and intended pedagogies. So thank you for watching, and I encourage you to read the paper for more details.